Sois Asis b'Hashem. I will rejoice. Rejoice, I will rejoice in Hashem, in God. And in this Maamar we'll find out exactly what this means. Togel nafshi, my spirit will be gladdened, belakoi, also in my God or godliness. Ki, because he'll be shani big deyesha, he dressed me in garments of salvation. The word yesh is like the word Yeshua. And the rest of the pasuk is u'me'il tzedakah ya'atani, and a tunic, an outer garment of charity he wrapped me in. Kechasan yechayin pe'er, like a bride, like a groom is empowered with beauty. Ukekala ta'ada keleha, like a kala puts on her kelim, her jewelry. So pasuk, it's a very upbeat pasuk, it's a very positive pasuk. Whatever the pasuk is about, it's describing jubilation, it's describing joy, it's describing happiness, and it's also explaining the basis and the motivation for the happiness. Kil bishani bigdayasha umil tzedakah yotani, and the immediate psukim after this continue this incredibly positive spirit, with which this haftarah begins. Now this Maamar is Maamar Parshas Nitzavim, because this is haftarah Parshas Nitzavim. So let me first say the obvious. The obvious is that there is a takana, there's an ancient takana that we should read in the Torah, on the Chumash. And that at a certain point, and we're not sure if it happened during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash or after the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash, there was a gzeira made, there was a decree prohibiting, outlawing the reading of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, reading of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. So the Tanoim at that time suggested that instead of reading the Chumash, which was not allowed, they would read a parallel section in Nevi'im, in Navi, in the prophets. And Dafke Navi, not Ksuvim, Dafke Nevi'im. And they found for every single Parsha, for every single Kriyas HaTorah, a parallel reading in Navi. And instead of reading the Chumash, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, which they were not allowed, they read the Navi. Now, parenthetically, as an aside, there is a Gemara which speaks about Amalek and Megillas Esther and Purim that infers, that perhaps infers, that everything in Yiddishkeit exists on all 3 levels of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim are 3 different madregas. The Chamisha Chumshei Torah, this is Moshe Rabbeinu, this is higher than prophecy, because this is Pel Peh. Hashem talked to Moshe Rabbeinu like you speak face to face. The middle level is Nevuah, which is prophecy, and the lowest level is Ksuvim, which is written with Ruach HaKodesh, which is really a lower form, a lower level of prophecy. It's not entirely different, but it's certainly different in its external appearance. So when there was a prohibition, when there was outlaw to read the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, they decided to replace it with Nevi'im, but Dafke Nevi'im and not Ksuvim, because Nevuah is higher than Ksuvim, higher than Ruach HaKodesh. And as I said, every idea in Tanakh exists in each of the 3. This is just when you get to the Megillah Esther. Every idea in Tanakh, every idea in Torah Shebeksav appears in Chumash, it appears again in Nevuah, in Navi, it appears again in Ksuvim. In many cases, you'll find them in the Sefer Tehillim. So there is a notion that if you find something in the Chumash, you'll be able to find that same idea again in the Nevi'im, and then a third time in the Ksuvim. So when the Tanoim enacted the recitation of Maftir, of Haftarah, so first of all they should have 7 brachas, like there are 7 aliyahs, and a bunch of other similarities to the Kriyas HaTorah, a minimum of 21 psukim, and so on and so forth. But they made the Haftarahs to be like the Parsha. The Navi, the section of the prophets, the section of the Navi, that you read on a particular week, reflects the Kriyas HaTorah you did that day. What if you have more than one Kriyas HaTorah? Like, for example, if it's Shabbos and Eish Chodesh, or it's Shabbos and Chanukah, or it's Shabbos and Eish Chodesh and Chanukah. So the rule is the Haftarah reflects the last reading. In other words, if it would be, let's say, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, the first Sefer Torah would read 6 aliyahs of the Parshas HaShavua. The 7th aliyah would be Rosh Chodesh, and the Haftarah would be Chanukah, and then the Haftarah would be, the Mafta would be Chanukah, and the Haftarah would be the Haftarah of Chanukah, it wouldn't be Rosh Chodesh. So this is how the Haftarahs are designed. They reflect the reading, and they reflect the last reading. I heard once a sikh from the Rebbe about this. The exception to this rule is Maamar Chodesh. Maamar Chodesh doesn't have a reading. It's a Haftarah which is not connected to a Kriya, which is an interesting tzarech here. But there's a very big exception to the rule that I just established. That the Haftarah, that the section of Novi which is read on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is reflective of the Kriya. And that exception is the last 10 weeks of the year. The 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, including Tisha B'Av. And the second 7 weeks, after Tisha B'Av, and there's always 7 Shabbos after Tisha B'Av till Rosh Hashanah, we deviate. Instead of reading Kriyas, which are connected to the Parshas HaShavua in any way, we read Kriyas, which is connected to the time of year. The 3 Haftarahs we read before Tisha B'Av are called Puraniyos. They speak about rebuke and Musar for doing Avedas, which brings about the Churban. And the 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av are called Shiva Denechemta. When you read a Haftarah, you read a Navi that's consoling the Jewish people. Nachamu, Nachamu, Amei, Anoich, Yaneich, Hu Menachemchem, and so on. The Eibush is consoling us for having destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and in effect, he's promising to build the new Beis HaMikdash. Consequently, the Haftarahs, at least officially, are not linked to the Parshas HaShavua. They're linked to the Zman HaShana. But of course, the Rebbe spoke about this so much. Everything is b'hashgacha pratis, b'chlal, especially in Torah, and you must say that there was a link between the Haftarahs and the Parshas HaShavua, even though officially the Haftarahs are not connected to the Parshas HaShavua, they're connected to the time of year. And the Rebbe has a number of sichas, Maamar, maybe more than a number, where he tries to find the link between the Haftarah and the Parshas HaShavua, even though directly it's not intended. This is the Haftarah of Parshas Nitzavim. Nitzavim is always the Shabbos, which is read before Rosh Hashanah. So you always read Sois Asis, B'Havaya Togel Nafshi Belakoi in the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. And it's officially not the Haftarah of Nitzavim, it's a Haftarah of Nechama, of consolation for the Churban Beis HaMikdash, which happened on Tisha B'Av. Here's a Maamar, which is going to study the first pasuk of this Haftarah. It's going to break it down into individual sections. Seisas B'Hashem is one section. Togel Nashi Belekoi, Kil Bishani Bigdei Yeshem, Milstoka Yatoni, Kechas Nichayim Perach Kalatade Keleha. He's going to analyze each of the words of these psukim and explain them, but he's going to explain them in the spirit of Rosh Hashanah. In other words, officially, it's one of the Shiva Denechemta, which has to do with Tisha B'Av, and it's not connected to the Parshas HaShavua. In this Maamar, we're going to be studying this pasuk, and we're going to show how this pasuk has a lot to do with what happens on Rosh Hashanah, and ultimately what happens on Sukkot. That on Rosh Hashanah there's a great revelation of godliness, but it's in a hidden state, and on Sukkot the revelation of godliness is far more revealed, and the difference is going to be in part that the Gila of Rosh Hashanah is called Gila, which is a hidden joy, and the Gila of Sukkot is called Simcha, which is a revealed joy. So here's a Maamar on Parshas Nitzavim, which is connected to the Shiva Denechemta, which is connected to Rosh Hashanah. Those are the facts. So we're going to learn this Maamar in Mitzvah Hashem. It's quite long. But before I do, I want to state something which is familiar to many people already, but it should be stated because of the time of year, and particularly we're learning this Maamar on Parshas Nitzavim, and so on and so forth. And there's an old rule: you don't only tell people things that they haven't heard before. You tell people things that they already know, in the spirit of Ein Mezarz and El Mezaraz, and you're re-experiencing it by rediscussing it. And that is, it says in the Hayem Yem, that the Baal Shem Tov said that every month of the year, in the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, we call it Shabbos Mevarach. The Shabbos when we bless or sanctify Mevarach and Mekadesh the new month, the new moon, which is going to be born in the subsequent days. Now, the truth of the matter is, we're not being Mekadesh the Chodesh at all. We're not being Ma'aber the Chodesh at all. We're not being Mekadesh the Chodesh at all. This was done by the person who made the calendar, whose name was Rabbi Hillel. He sanctified every Rosh Chodesh between his times and when Mashiach is going to come. But nevertheless, there's a custom that the Shabbos before, since people are gathered in shul, we're mechadash the Chodesh, even though the kiddush of the Chodesh from a halachic perspective has already been done in the 2nd century, the 3rd century, whenever Rabbi Hillel did this. So the minig Yisrael Torah is that before Musaf on Shabbos Mavarcha we say Misha Os Nisim Laviseinu, and we declare when the Chodesh is going to be. We try to know when the Moed is, and so on and so forth. Of course, the notable exception is Tishrei. Shabbos Mavarchim Tishrei, we don't say Berachas HaChodesh. We don't announce when Rosh Hashanah is going to be. We don't announce when the Moed is. We just ignore it. And in the spirit of Chabad Chassidim, that every Shabbos Mavarchim we say the whole Tilim. That we do. Shabbos Mevarchim Tishrei. You may not be Mevarchas HaChodesh in shul, but we do say the entire Tilim if we're able to, of course. But we're not Mevarch the Chodesh. And part of the reason we're not Mevarch the Chodesh is because it's supposed to be about Keseh. The whole idea of Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be a secret. It's not supposed to be known. You certainly don't want to announce it, so that it should be easier for Yidden when it comes to the judgment of Rosh Hashanah. So the Baal Shem Tov said that on this idea, that every single month, the Shabbos before the Chodesh, Yidden gather together in shul and the Mavarech and the Makadesh the subsequent Chodesh. And Tishrei, we don't do this. It's because Tishrei, the Eibishter blesses. The Eibishter is Mavarech and Makadesh, the new moon of Chodesh Tishrei. And in the Koyach that the Eibishter blesses and sanctifies, the new moon of Chodesh Tishrei, we're able to bless and sanctify all the subsequent Chadashim, all the subsequent moons. And the Baal Shem Tov added, what is the Nusach HaBrocha of Kiddush HaChodesh? Which the Eibishter says, the answer is, Atan Nitzavim Hayem Kulchem B'fnei Hashem Elokecha. That the Eibishter sanctifies the new month, which is the beginning of the new year, by recognizing the special place that Yidden have in the Eibishter's world. It's like in the Bar Mitzvah Maamar, which we're so familiar with. That in our tefillin it says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the greatness of the Eibishter. Tefillin the Moreh Alma Maksiv Behu, what does it say in the Eibishter's film? Umi Ka'amcha Yisrael, Mi Ka'amcha Ki Yisrael, Goy Echad Ba'aretz. That just like the Eibishter is announced by us as Echad, the Eibishter himself announces us that we're also Echad, we're one nation on earth. So it's a similar, this is done in tefillin. And the same is true here. When we bench the Chodesh, obviously we praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when the Eibishter benches the Chodesh, he praises the Jewish people with the bracha of Atam Nitzavim and Teilish Yisrael, that all the Yidden are the same, etc., etc. So the Parshas HaShavua, Parshas Nitzavim, and of course the way it works practically is, sometimes Nitzavim and Vayelech are together, and sometimes Nitzavim and Vayelech are separate. But Nitzavim will always be the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah. What makes that determination? If either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur are Shabbos, so then Nitzavim and Vayelech are going to be read together, because the Shabbos Shuvah is going to be Ha'azinu, because there's going to be no Shabbos between Kippur and Sukkot. If neither Rosh Hashanah nor Sukkot nor Yom Kippur is Shabbos, so then Pas Bag HaMelech, the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, you will read Nitzavim, and the Shabbos Shuvah is going to be Vayelech. So, as I said to you before, we're learning this pasuk. It's a long Maamar explaining this pasuk, but it's explaining this pasuk not in context of what the pasuk means per se, and not in context of how this pasuk is connected to Parshas HaShavua, but in the context of how this pasuk is connected to what's going to happen later that week, the inyan of the new year, the inyan of Rosh Hashanah. So now let's go to the text and let's read the Maamar. We'll start from the beginning again. Sois Asis Parsha. The Navi says, I will rejoice in Havaya, in the Eibishter. Togel nafshi belakoi, my spirit is going to be gladdened also in my God or my godliness. Ki, what is my happiness about? On the level of Sisa, on the level of Gila, Simcha and Gila. Ki, because he'll be shani bigdei yeshe, he draped me, he dressed me in garments of salvation. Ume'il tzedakah ya'atani, and he wrapped around me also a tunic, a poncho of tzedakah. As the Chasin is beautified with the empowerment of Kahuna, like a Kala puts on her jewelry. This is the pasuk, and you'll see later on this entire pasuk is going to be studied and analyzed, and it's all going to be done in the spirit and the context of the Yomim Neroyim and Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot and so forth. It Says the Rebbe, line 6, Hine. Ha'hefresh bein simcha lagila. In the beginning of the pasuk, you have two words that both denote joy. Now, of course, we know from the Sheva Brachas that there's a subtle Lashonis Shel Simcha. There's 10 different expressions of Simcha, right? 10 different expressions of Simcha. But two of them are Simcha and Gila. Says the Rebbe, what's the difference between the expression of Simcha and the expression of Gila? And he answers immediately, Ki ha-simcha nikra b'higoles nigles ha-simcha mibachutz. The word Simcha denotes a joy that's by definition evident, revealed on the outside, which is of course what Simcha means. Joy means that the happiness which I'm experiencing inwardly is radiating, shining, is manifesting outward. Says the Rebbe, V'hi bechinas Chag HaSukkos, which is the Yom Tov of Sukkos, which is Man Simcha Seinu, is a time where the joy, where the happiness is without. You can see it. It's on the outside of the person. The joy is effervescent, overflowing. As opposed to Gila. Gila, we translate it in English gladness because you just want to find a different translation. So you shouldn't say the same translation for both words. But Gila also means happiness. Nikra, this is called forward. This is representative. One is experiencing joy, but they're experiencing joy on the inside in his inner heart. You can't see it on the outside. So Gila is more subtle. Gila means a happiness, means a sense of contentment and happiness which is on the inside. Simcha means a joy which is overflowing and on the outside. It says in the pasuk, that when a person experiences joy in the context of Gila, it's not a contradiction to the other. Other means fear, trepidation, trembling. When one trembles, they have a joy, but because they're afraid, or because they're serious, or because they're preoccupied, the joy is covered over by that intensity. You shouldn't be able to see it on the outside. On the inside, there is a smearing, there is a presence of this joy, but outwardly you don't see it. And on the outside, what you see and what's revealed is trepidation, is fear, and the Rebbe says, Rosh Hashanah, as we're going to explain later. So it's a little bit backwards. Seis Asis b'Hashem is Sukkos, Togil Nafshe b'Likutei is Rosh Hashanah Kippur, it's Yom Neroim. So of course, if you were writing this, you would say Togil Nafshe b'Likutei Seis Asis b'Havaya, but that's not how this pasuk works. The very beginning of the pasuk talks about joys that's on the outside, which is not going to happen till Sukkos, and Togil Nafshe b'Likutei, which is a joy which is not so outward, because it's quieted by the trepidation. This is an allusion to the Yom Neroim, to the Seres Yemechu. And the Rebbe concludes on line 14, V'hine, HaKosov the pasuk says, Seis Asis, I will rejoice. V'lei pirish mihu ha'emer, there's no allusion, there's no reference, there's no indication who is saying I will be happy, who is going to be happy. And the answer is, V'hainu lefi, the answer for why it doesn't specify is going to be happy, because it's Shehu Maamar Hanavi Bad Klal Yisrael. This is a pasuk in Tanakh in Nevi'im. And the Navi is speaking on behalf of every single one of us and all of us collectively, and Yidden collectively say Seis Asis Bad Hashem Togil Nafshe b'Likutei. So we have a lot of things that we have to analyze. We have to analyze what Simcha is. We have to understand what Gila is, why Simcha is connected to Sukkos, why Gila is connected to Rosh Hashanah. What does it mean that the whole collection, the collective of the Jewish people are in this state of Simcha, etc., etc., etc. This is the opening salvo of the Maamar. This is how the Maamar begins. Now we're not going to get back to Seis Asis, till when? Till line 238, which is a considerable distance into this Maamar. Until 2:30, we're going to go off and talk about other things. We're going to talk about Rosh Hashanah and the difference between Rosh Hashanah and every day and so on and so forth. But we will make significant references to the Simcha as well, but the actual answers to these questions are not going to be found till the end of the Maamar. Says the Rebbe on line 17, this needs to be explained. What's going on here? What is Simcha? What is Gila? What's the relationship between Simcha and Sukkos? And the relationship between Gila and Rosh Hashanah? All of this needs to be explained. So in order to answer these questions, he adds one more. That it says in the Pasuk, Seis Asis, I will rejoice and rejoice. It doesn't identify who is saying the word Seis Asis. So the Rebbe answers, V'hainu lefi, the reason doesn't specify saying the word Seis Asis, lefi shu maimer an-novi bad klal Yisrael. The prophet is speaking for every single Jew. In other words, every single Jew is saying Seis Asis bad Hashem tagel nafshi b'lekoy. Kil b'shane b'gdei yesher, mostaki yatani, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Rabbi is going to want to understand what is the message, which has to do with every single Jew. So the Rebbe goes off into Rosh Hashanah. We'll get back to the Pasuk much later in the Maamar. Obi in the Pshat in the Pasuk Seis Asis and Togel Nafshi will be explained by prefacing first Hinei Ksiv Tiku B'Chei de Shefer. That on Rosh Hashanah we blow Shefer. This is a Pasuk in Tilim. Tiku B'Chei de Shefer B'Kesel Yem Chagenu Ki Cheik Yisrael Hu Mishpat Lelekei Yankiv. And of course on this Pasuk Tiku B'Chei de Shefer there are many Maimori Chassidis. And the most striking ingredient in the pasuk is that no word means explicitly Rosh Hashanah, right? It says Tiku b'Chodesh, which means you blow on Rosh Chodesh. Doesn't say which Rosh Chodesh, Shofar. And then it says B'Kesa l'Yem Chagenu, and in some Maimorim it's explained, some Sfarim it's explained that B'Kesa is the raya that it's Tishrei, because the Gemara says it's Eidu Chag Sha'Chodesh Miskasabei. When do you have a Yom Tov? And Rosh Chodesh, this is Rosh Hashanah. So B'Kesa l'Yem Chagenu becomes the hint. But in the Pasuk, it doesn't say explicitly Rosh Hashanah, it simply says Tiku B'Chei de Shefer. And of course, the simple and obvious question is, why can't the Pasuk say what it means, rather than have to learn it in a convoluted way, in an indirect way, and so forth. When you read the Pasuk on the most basic level, you're left with wonderment. Because it says Tiku B'Chei, you have to blow on an occasion, which is called Chedesh, which is of course a reference to Rosh Hashanah, V'lei Pirush be'ezah Chedesh, but it doesn't specify which Chedesh. And the question is, Tiku b'Chedesh Hashvi Shefer would have been very helpful. V'havalei l'meimer b'Chedesh Hashvi, like you have the pasuk in Parshas Pinchas, so b'Chedesh Hashvi b'Chel HaChedesh, all in even Yem Trua Yelachem. So how come in this pasuk in Tilim it says b'Chedesh without specifying which Rosh Chodesh it is? V'gam, the second question is, my diksiv shefer. It says Tiku b'Chodesh on Rosh Chodesh you will blow shefer, and it should say Tiku b'Chodesh b'shefer. You blow the shefer. In other words, Tiku b'shefer means you're blowing the shefer, as opposed to Tiku shefer, which has a different connotation. So the question is, why does it say Tiku b'Chodesh shefer? It should say Tiku b'Chodesh b'shefer miboyel. So the Rebbe, of course, answers the question by focusing on the word Chiddush. The answer is that when you use the word Chedesh, you automatically know that it's Rosh Hashanah, and there's no need to specify which Chedesh. This is going to be the teretz. Tiku b'Chedesh. You blow on the Rosh Chodesh. Which Rosh Chodesh? The Rosh Chodesh, which is an union of Chiddush. The Rosh Chodesh, which is the idea of novelty. And which Rosh Chodesh is an idea of Chadash, of Nayas, of news, of new, this is Rosh Hashanah. In other words, the answer is that the Torah, the Pasuk in Tilim is quite explicit. By simply saying B'Chedesh, we know it's Rosh Hashanah. The word Chedesh means newness, renewal. Shal Shem Zen Nikra Kain. Kol Chedesh, which also explains why every single Rosh Chedesh carries in a narrower sense the allusion, the reference, the term. Chedesh, with each month there's a new moon, so the word Chedesh connotes newness. Similarly, in terms of the year, Rosh Hashanah is Chedesh to the whole year. And this is what the pasuk is saying, Tiku. When should you blow Shefer b'Chedesh? On that Rosh Chedesh, which is novel, which is new, compared to the rest of the year, Shefer Pirush. That b'Chedush shall Shefer, when there's a renewal of the Shefer, b'Chedesh Shefer, when there's a renewal of the Shefer. Shah Shefer is Chadesh b'Chol Shana, when you blow Shefer again in a new way, because the Shefer shall Shana Zu, the Shefer of this year, Eine Shefer shall Shana Cheres, is not the Shefer of another year. So Tiku b'Chedesh Shefer, when there's a new blowing of Shefer, you should do the act, the event of Tiku, and this is an allusion to Rosh Hashanah. So I guess the most important point here is the word Chedesh. Tiku b'Chidush. You blow when there's an Inyan of Chidush, and the Chidush is on Rosh Hashanah. Well, why is there in order to explain what is the significance of the word Chidush and how Chidush is connected to Rosh Hashanah, as opposed to Rosh Chidush Cheshvan and Rosh Chidush Kislev and Rosh Chidush Elul and Rosh Chidush Tammuz. Says the Rebbe, Tzorich lahagdim b'yed inyan Rosh Hashanah. We have to first examine the concept of Rosh Hashanah. And the way we're going to examine what Rosh Hashanah is by asking the obvious question, the famous question. That Rosh Hashanah was nikva be'echad b'tishrei. Rosh Hashanah was fixed on the first day in the month of Tishrei. Shaboy nivra adam, in which a person was created, which is hu yom shishi l'maaseh bereishis, is the sixth day of creation. Ki b'chav hei b'yalul nivra ha'elam. Everybody knows the world was created on the 25th day of Elul. And Rosh Hashanah, which is the first day of Tishrei. Adam and Chava were created. So now the question becomes, why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? Why do we celebrate the creation of the world? Why do we celebrate the newness of the world? On the Rosh Hashanah, why don't we celebrate the newness of the world on the date when the world was actually created, which is Chaf Heyel? This is the question, a very good question. Hashem created the world in Chaf Heyel. Chaf Heyel is nothing. There are many sichas of the Rebbe, by the way, where the Rebbe talks about Chaf Heyel, and in some cases he even raises it above Rosh Hashanah and so on. But in Torah and in Halacha and in Minhag Yisrael, there is nothing that we do to commemorate the date that the Eibishter created the world, which is Chaf Heyel. Instead, the whole tumult, the whole shturim is Rosh Hashanah, and the question is why? What happened to Rosh Hashanah? Man was created, so what's the significance of this? So the Rebbe answers the question. We go on line 27. The question becomes, Lama, why is it Ein Kevim Rosh Hashanah B'Eimalav Ma'aseh Bereishis? We don't establish Rosh Hashanah when we, of course, celebrate the creation of the world, the renewal of the creation of the world, and we talk about judgment and the new year and so on. B'Yom Aleph L'Ma'aseh Bereishis, on the date which arguably is far more logical to be the date that we commemorate, which is the first day of creation. Or said alternatively, the first day of creation should have been the first day of Tishrei. Why is it that the beginning of the creation of the world, the 25th day in Elul? The day of Rosh Hashanah is Shem Aleph B'Tishrei, which is the first day of Tishrei. Is not associated with creation, it's associated with man, with Adam Rishon. The question is why? And the Rebbe here, there's many answers to this question. Here in this Maamar, the Rebbe is going to say a little bit different than written on the Maamar. It's a simple idea, but it's also a philosophically wonderful idea. It's a really special idea. So let's pause for a moment, okay? You know, over the years that we've been learning, I have told you many times the story with the Rogatchover about Shabbos. It's not a Rosh Hashanah story, it's a Shabbos story. And the story, of course, is that there is a boy in Leningrad, in Russia, where the Rogatchover lived for quite a few years, who walks into a shul late on the Shabbos afternoon. Shabbos is about to end. The shul is empty. The shul is abandoned. The shul is deserted. And the only person in shul, or one of the only people in the shul, is the Rogatchover Gaon, the great genius of Rogatchover. And of course, all of us know that the Rogatchover was, amongst other things, he was a Gaon Adir, right? He was a legend in his own time. But one of the things that fascinated the Rogatchover, that intrigued the Rogatchover, that consumed the Rogatchover, that obsessed the Rogatchover, was the concept of time. The philosophical concept of time as it relates to Yiddishkeit, to Halacha, to Torah, to Mitzvahs, to Chazal. And he was sitting very still, which was uncharacteristic of him, with a pocket watch, counting the seconds. And the pocket watch was ticking 1 second, another second, until finally it came to that second when Shabbos ended. And as the Rogatchover was holding this watch, and he counted, and he counted, and he came to the second when Shabbos ended, and he said, "Ois, no more." And he got up. And this young boy who witnessed him do this, of course, found it very strange. The Rogatchover was famous for not being able to sit still. He was full of energy. He was such a powerful person, with such an incredible mind. And here he was sitting so still, like a little boy playing with his fingers, examining, counting away the seconds till Shabbos ended. What was it that the Rogatchover was busy with? What was it that was intriguing him? What was the issue as far as he was concerned? And of course, the answer to the question is that Rogatchover was fascinated by the idea that a clock ticks away a second and is a whole new concept of time. A minute before Shabbos, it's a weekday. A minute after Shabbos, it's again a weekday. And in between those two, you have a Shabbos. What has to happen for Shabbos to appear and for Shabbos to end? Nothing. Time passes. Shabbos happens entirely by itself. Yom Tov really also happens by itself. But on Yom Tov, at least we say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim Yisrael inu dekachinol izmanu. We have some kind of an involvement in the sanctification of Yom Tov, but Shabbos is Mekadesh HaShabbos. Shabbos happens simply because the clock ticks. Now, of course, we make Kiddush on Shabbos, Kachei, B'Knisasei, B'Yossi, but Shabbos happened, and this was intriguing to him. The reason it was intriguing to him because he understood that Shabbos was not Shabbos because of a ritual, but rather there was a ritual because of Shabbos. The thing that was so deep to him was the idea that time is not the same. Sunday and Monday are not only different because the sun went up and the sun went down and the sun came up again. Sunday and Monday are not only different because on Sunday people don't work and Monday people work, but there's an absolute energy in the day, which is the life of the time itself. And the time consists of units, of parts, and that every unit of time has a different life, has a different energy, has a different spiritual fire. This to him was fascinating. Nobody does anything. The clock ticks, and it's a whole new situation. The 24 or the 25 hours of Shabbos have a certain energy. The hours before Shabbos and hours after Shabbos have a very different energy. The Rebbe has innumerable siches, many siches. We talks about Shabbos being an akuda achas of zman, very involved siches, where he also analyzes, he observes, he examines the concept of Shabbos as it relates to the time of Shabbos itself. Of course, another example for this would be Sfiras HaOmer, right? Sfiras HaOmer means you're counting days. The days themselves are the mitzvah. The holiness is in the time itself. But this is what fascinated the Rogatchover, the idea that time is different for no reason other than the fact that the time passed. The Eibishter created units of time. In other words, you can make an argument that time is a meaningless, from a philosophical perspective, that time is a meaningless component in the reality of the world. Time isn't valuable. Clocks are valuable. In other words, what makes time valuable is the fact that we have a limited amount of it, right? What's a clock? A body is a clock. A human being is a clock. There's a certain life expectancy. There's a normal life expectancy. There's an extraordinary life expectancy. And unfortunately, on some occasions, it's less than that. But if a person lived forever, what value would time have? And what changes from one day to the next? What changes from 1 minute to the next? Nothing, except what you do. There's a philosophical argument that says there's nothing special about time. There's only something special about how you use the time. Going back to Shabbos again, you can make an argument that there's no difference between Shabbos and Sunday and Friday, except that on Friday you work and on Sunday you work, and Shabbos you make Kiddush and don't work. Meaning to say, the Shabbos is created not by the time itself, the Shabbos is created by what you do with this time. But the Rogatchover understood very deeply that that's wrong. When the Pasuk says, in the beginning of creation, the Eibishter created luminaries, and the purpose of the luminaries is that they should bring L'Hoir al others to bring light to the earth, v'lim shel b'yom u'b'layla, to dominate by day and by night, and they will be, v'hayu, and they will be, la'oiseis u'lameyadim l'yamim u'lashanim. La'oiseis as the basis for the heavenly signs, which of course have to do with natural phenomena that are unusual, like a rainbow, like an eclipse, which we had recently, and so on. And Lamayadim means for the Yomim Tovim, which did not exist when the Eibusha created the world. But the Pasuk in Genesis, the Pasuk in Bereshit is anticipating Mayadim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and so forth, which would come later. The Yomim and days, Lashanim and years. So the Pasuk in Bereshit, when the Eibusha created the world, and he created the sun and the moon, he created them to represent time, or to measure time, to be a clock representative of time. And he added their measuring of time is not just days and nights. Obviously, the sun and the moon account for day and night because half a day approximately is sunlight and half a day approximately is moonlight. So whenever the sun and the moon complete a cycle, it's a day. That's a natural phenomenon. And then, of course, you also have seasons, which depends where you live on the earth and the equator and so on. But Moyadim, Yomim Tovim, is not naturally built into time. Moyadim is a spiritual idea. The idea that there's a Yom Tov, that there's a special unit of time, is not part of how you see the sun and the moon on a very physical, down-to-earth level. It represents something very, very spiritual. And when the Eibishter created the world, he created the sun and the moon to represent not just Yom and Laila, but Moyadim and Yomim and Shanim. What is the idea? The idea is that when the Eibishter created the world, and the Eibishter created time, he created different types of time. Time is not a passive continuum. Time is not something you journey through. Time is something you live. And every day there's a different energy. And the different energy of every day, and like it says in Tanya, in Sof Perek Mamalef, every hour there is a different energy. And if you want to get more involved, every second there's a different energy. And the energy of the time affects what's going to happen during that time. Like it says in Sefer Keles, there's Yudal Ditim L'Ra, there's different times. There's good times and there's bad times, which has to do with the energy of the time itself. This is what fascinated the Rogatchover. This was the issue. Shabbos is Shabbos because of the time itself. We make Kiddush because Shabbos has already been made special by the virtue of the fact that it's a special kind of time. So there's two ideas here, at least two ideas. There's two ideas here. The simple idea is that time in and of itself has no meaning. What separates one unit of time from another unit of time is entirely how you use it. The deeper concept, of course, is that time has an energy. And every unit of time has a different energy. And based on the different energies in the various different units of time, one unit of time, one piece of time, one section of time is separated from another piece of time. And this is going to be the issue that the Rebbe is going to raise in the Maamar. The question is, why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and not celebrate Chafayelu? Why? Isn't it true that Eibishter created the world on the 25th day of Elul? Let's celebrate creation. Why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah when man was created? And of course the answer is because we are not commemorating a has-been. Rosh Hashanah is not a celebration of something that happened. If Rosh Hashanah were celebrating once upon a time on this moment or on this date, the Eibishter created the world, we would absolutely celebrate Chafayelu. Rather, on Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate something which is happening now. And what's happening is called Chiddush. What's happening is called new. And whatever it is that's called new doesn't happen Chafayelu. It happens on Rosh Hashanah and because of Adam. This is why Rosh Hashanah is celebrated on the 6th day of creation, when Adam and Chava were created, rather than on the first day. So Tiku B'Chodesh means, when are you going to blow shofar? When the newness takes place. And the newness has to do with the energy of the time itself. And the newness, which has to do with the energy of the time itself, is not connected to creation, because as far as creation is concerned, every second is exactly the same as every second that came before and every second that came after, but in terms of the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation has to do with man, so the newness of time is associated with the Rosh Hashanah. And this is the point that the Rebbe is going to make. So you're not celebrating the newness of the world, you're celebrating the newness of the spirit of the world. Or you're not commemorating an event that happened many years ago with this occasion, but you're commemorating something which is happening right now. And the newness which is happening right now is connected to man and not the creation itself, because that's where the newness lies. So let's get to the Maamar, let's read on. And we're holding line 30, Achin. The answer is that when you revisit the beginning of when Hashem created the heaven and the earth, which of course is Chaf HaYelul, there's no reason to make that a special date. There's no reason to identify the moment when the creation began in the calendar and commemorate it each year. You know why? When you talk about the 25th day of Elul, when the Eibush created heaven and earth, says the Rabbi, what happened on that date was the Eibush created the physical world. And in terms of the physical world, nothing is special on that date in subsequent years. That the physical world should appear as physical and as material, as crude. Liyesh, as an independent entity, as though it's separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak. V'davar, and a thing unto itself. Says the Rebbe, when you think about Chaf HaYelul, when the Eibush created the world, there's no reason to make a Yom Tov. Why? Because on the one hand, from the moment the Eibush made the world, nothing changes. It continues to go. A year after the Eibush created the world, what's going to happen? He's going to continue making the world. The world's going to continue existing. So nothing new is occurring. And we're not celebrating a commemorative event. We're celebrating a current event. Nothing is happening on Chaf HaYelul because the world continues. As the expression in some of Maamar Chassidus, it's called Chiddush HaYishanis. Whatever it was he was doing, he's continuing to do with no change. Or, alternatively, you can flip it the other way. What's the other way? Hashem creates the world every single second. In terms of Gashmi Stika Yesh Mayayin. If you want to celebrate that Hashem creates the world every single second is Rosh Hashanah. Regarding the event of creating the world as a physical being, in the way of Yesh Mayayin, it says, HaMachadesh Betuve Bechol Yem Tamid Ma'aseh Bereishis. Hashem creates the world every single day. In fact, Hashem creates the world every single hour. Hashem creates the world every single rega, every single instant. Me'ayin liyesh, me'ayin v'efes hamuchat liyesh. This event of creation is new all the time, every day. So if you have to make up your mind. If you want to celebrate Chaf HaYelul, you're going to either celebrate the fact that this is when it all started, and if you're going to celebrate on Chaf HaYelul, which is when it all started, when the next Chaf HaYelul comes, nothing is starting, nothing is new, nothing is different. It's just continuing. So you remember, you're honoring, you're marking the time, but nothing is happening. Or you can focus on it in the other extreme, that every single second Hashem creates the world from a non-existential being into an independent being that seems to exist independent from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc., etc., etc. So Rosh Hashanah is every second. So again, Mimon Nafshech, there's no reason to celebrate Chaf HaYelul because there's nothing happening on that date. Ella. So instead, it's Al Briyas Adam. The Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, when we get together and we blow shofar and we crown the Eibush as a king, it's so on and so forth. It's connected to the creation of man, which is B'yem Shishi L'Maaseh Bereishis, on the sixth day of creation, because the creation of man affects now Chiddush. It's not what happened, but it's happening every year on Rosh Hashanah. It's a special day, and there's a special energy, and that energy has to do with the word Chiddush, Chidush, and this is why we're commemorating it. In other words, it's not celebrating the world, it's celebrating the purpose of the world. Because as far as the world is concerned, from the moment it was created, it's unchanged, or every single instant it's changing. But the purpose of the world is renewed in units of time, and one of those units is a year. And when a new year begins spiritually, there's a new energy associated with this new year, and this has to do with Rosh Hashanah. And then the Rebbe continues and he says further, not only are we commemorating Adam Rishon's creation, as opposed to the world's creation, because when the world was created, each subsequent year after the first year, nothing is new. It's the continuation of what was earlier. As opposed to Rosh Hashanah, which is the creation of man, there is something novel in terms of the world's purpose. So the Rebbe now continues and he says, and it's not even the body of Adam Rishon that you're celebrating, because the body is like the rest of the world. It was before and it is after. It's not really changing. El al nafshe. What we are commemorating Rosh Hashanah, which is truly novel, is the neshama of the human being. Shem, as the pasuk says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. God Almighty blew into the nostrils of Adam Rishon a breath of life. Shanish mas Adam Rishon, that the soul of Adam Rishon, which is the first human soul, which is created, of course, in the image of God. And it's a chelik, mamish, and so forth and so on. Hoysa klula mikol, neshamas Yisrael entails within itself, it includes within itself the souls of every single Jew that will ever exist. Of Adam, every single Yid is called Adam, because we are included in the neshama of Adam Rishon, and like it says in the Maamar Chassidishe, that neshamis all come from Adam Rishon, like ke'anvin de taldian be'itkele, like grapes hanging from a cluster. Some come from his eyes, some come from his ears, some come from his nose, some from his mouth. All the shishim ribui neshamas klolius, which each have shishim ribui nitzutzes, are part and parcel of the neshama of Adam Rishon. And they were all created Rosh Hashanah, and each year in Rosh Hashanah there's a newness about this neshama, in other words, about this purpose. It's not the passage of time, it's a new unit of time. And the new unit of time doesn't have to do with the world itself, because the world itself is not really changing, but the purpose of the world, which is Adam. V'hi tachlis iker briyas elamis, this collective soul of Adam Rishon is really the purpose of the whole creation. It says in the Pasuk and it says in the Medrash, Bereshis, that the Eibishter created the world Bereshis. And of course the word Bereshis is complicated in any way. Bereshis, Bara Lakim Es Hashmayim Es Haaretz. It should say Bereshis, it should say Bara Lakim Es Hashmayim Es Haaretz. What's the word Bereshis? So there's all kinds of interpretations. And Rashi brings the Medrash says that Bereshis is Beis Reshis. It's a remez. That Beis Reshis goes on Neshamas Yisrael and Teira, B'shvil Yisrael Shenikru Reshis. That one of the reasons for which the Eibishter created everything is Neshamas Yisrael, who are called the Reshis, like it says in the Pasuk, Keidit Yisrael Adashem Reshis Tfuwasa. Hine, His Chachas Briyazu. Since we're not talking about the creation itself, in which nothing new occurs, or the newness is every second, but not once a year, but the Neshama of the world, which is the purpose of the world, which is man, this is renewed every year at Rosh Hashanah, which is the emergence from a non-existential state to an independent state on a spiritual level. The Neshama, says the Rebbe, he is mischadesh as bechol Rosh Hashanah. It's not renewed every day, it's renewed on Rosh Hashanah. So what we're celebrating is not that on this date, so many years ago, the Eibishter created the world, but on this date, as we stand and speak, something new is happening as relates to the purpose of the creation, which is the creation of Adam Rishon and the renewal of the purpose of the world. And the Rebbe says on line 49, which explains why it's called Rosh Hashanah. And of course, this is the classic Rosh Hashanah Maimeh, which is the Maimeh in Atera, which is also based on a different Maimeh, not the Rebbe Likutei Torah, which we learned in an earlier year. Then why is it called Rosh Hashanah? And of course, the question is, it should be called Tchilas Hashanah, the beginning of the year. Why is it called the head? And the answer is because a head is not the beginning of the body. It's the nerve center. The head has the brain and the most vital organs, the mouth, and the nose, and the eyes, and the ears, and so on. So the head is not just the starting point of the body, it's the nerve center, it's the pneumius, it's the essence of the whole body. And of course, the idea is that when a baby is formed, the beginning of the creation of that child is going to be the head. And from the head, all the other limbs are going to radiate, are going to manifest. And then when the child is born, the head unifies the whole body, it feels the whole body, and gives life to the whole body, because the neshama rests in the brain, like it says in Tanya, and from the brain it radiates to the whole body. So the head is not just a part of the body, it's the center, it's the source, it's the beginning. And the same is true in time. Rosh Hashanah is not the first day of the year, it's the head of the year. It's a unit of 24 hours or 48 hours, which encompasses within itself the entire year in a microcosm, just like the head of a person encompasses the entire body in a microcosm. Like the head of a person. Al derech mashal, by way of analogy, shesham reishes gilui klolos achayis mi'atzmas hanefesh. That the head, the brain, is the place where there is the beginning of the manifesting, the revealing of life, which by itself is in a state of etzem, that it should be in a state of gilui. Asher ba'atzmas hanefesh, when you see the neshama that's in a state of etzem, kol proteis chalkos achayis, all the details that are going to later be divided up into different aspects, are klulam behelam, are included in one point. V'reish, it's yaslam behelam alagil, the beginning and their emergence from a hidden state to a revealed state, because there's a revelation of life, So the first word that's key is the word revelation. But it's the revelation of life, which is general. And the second key word is the word general, me'atzmius hanefesh, from the essence of the life of the person, b'moichin shabarash, on the brain which is in one's head, umehem mispashet, and after life begins to manifest in the head, it will later radiate l'chol eva, to each organ, to each limb, lefi mizge, according to its blend, utchanasi, and to its character. So the head is very, very vital. Now the short of this is, because I don't want to elaborate too much, is the neshama is a single point. And the neshama is an infinity. It's called an etzem. That means it exists in such a way that it has no relationships with anything else. And if you would meet a neshama in Gan Eden, it would be keach ruchni echad pashat. The neshama is an indivisible point. Now inside that indivisible point of the neshama, there is tayag min keches v'chayes klulas babakayach. There's the possibility to give life to the body in a very diversified, in a very specialized, in a very applied, very precise way. But as the neshama exists in Gan Eden, what we call the etzem neshama, the neshama on a level of being a single point, is predominant. So what happens when the neshama comes into the guf? So the first thing that happens is the pnimius neshama and the chitzenius neshama separate. The essence of the neshama, which makes the neshama be a single unit, we call that chaya yechida, or the neshama of the neshama, in the words of the Zayir, is hidden, is removed. And by removing the pnimius, so the chitzenius begins to separate. By taking away the etzem neshama, the neshama lin neshama, or the chaya and yechida, the nefesh, ruach and neshama begins to emerge. And this is called the Reichus Agilu, the beginning of the revelation. The neshama comes into the brain and reveals itself in the brain. Now the neshama which comes into the brain, reveals itself in the brain, you can look at it from two perspectives. When you look at it from the perspective of the etzem neshama, it's, quote, only a revelation, it's a secondary thing. When you look at it in relationship to the rest of the body, it's a gili kloli, it's a revelation which has within itself everything that's going to come later in the body. Because to the neshama, it's not etzem, it's gili. And to the guf, it's a gili kloli and not a gili prati. So that's what the word roish means, it's the head. Namely, it's the beginning of the emergence of life from an etzem state to a gili state. But the emergence of life from an etzem state to a gili state that exists in the head, compared to the etzem, it's only a gili. But compared to the guf, it's a gili kloli. And just like in a human body, the head is the place where this first step of revelation takes place, and therefore the head is the source and the energy center and the unifier and so on and so forth of the body. Says the Rebbe, Kach b'Rosh Hashanah, line 55, the same is Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah nimsha gilui klolos achayes shel kol Hashanah. Life emerges from on high for an entire year. Now what happened last year? There was also life. When every Rosh Hashanah comes, life ends and life is renewed. The argument of this Maamar is that the idea that the Rosh Hashanah life, Erev Rosh Hashanah life ends, and Rosh Hashanah life is renewed, is not connected to the physical world. It's not connected to the world as we see it on a very physical, simple level. Because the world on a physical, simple level, you have only two possibilities. A, it was created once upon a time and it's not being created anymore. B, every single second it's being renewed, and there's no difference between Rosh Hashanah the day before and the day after. The idea that Rosh Hashanah something happens which didn't happen the day before, is not going to happen the day after, it's not going to happen again until the next year, has to do with the spirit of the world, with the neshama of the world, with the purpose of the world. That's the chiddush. That there's life that lasts for a year. This life that lasts for a year is not about the physical world, but the physical world's spiritual purpose. And when Rosh Hashanah comes, there's a new life that's lasting for a year. And this new life is not only beginning in Rosh Hashanah, it is concentrated in Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is called the head. Umimenu, and from this date, or these 2 dates, Nimsha Chayes, life radiates, Lischalkus Pratim, to be divided up into details. Of course, the way it's explained in Chassidus, from Rosh Hashanah is divided up into the 12 months, and then each month is divided up into 30 days or 4 weeks and so forth and so on. And of course you have all kinds of diverse aspects. For example, Sholosh Yom, 3 occasions where time is going to be special. Mayadim, Yom Tov is different than the weekdays. Arba Tkuf is the 4 seasons. And the 4 seasons, of course, are more natural phenomena, but they're distinct: winter, spring, summer, and fall. Ubarbo prokim, and there are 4 occasions shebehem ha'elam nidin, when the world is being judged, which is of course a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Then there's Yud Beis Chadoshim, there's division into the 12 months. V'yachar kach liyomim, then there's division into individual days. Liyis mechadesh b'chol yom, that every day there's a renewal. Tamid ma'aseh bereishis, all the time the event of creation. And as the Gemara tells us, v'adam nidin b'chol yom, man is judged every day. V'yachar kach, moreover, gam l'regoyim, man is judged every second, like the pasuk says, l'regoyim tebachanenu, every second is a new judgment. So the argument of the Rebbe is there's all of these divisions, but the basic unit is the unit of a year. And the idea that Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of that unit is not about the physiology of the world, but the purpose of the world, and that's why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Because Shreish is Gili Amshoch HaKlolos. What's the beginning of the revelation? Of bringing forward life on a level of Klal. He Mebechina Seviv, Kalaman is emerging from the level of Ein Sof called Seviv. And our Maamar, by the way, is going to talk to a considerable degree about this transference, if you will, from Seviv to Mamali. And it's going to be discussed especially elaborately in the Biur, which we really never learned the Biur. And the Biur on this Maamar is going to discuss more than anything else the transition from Seviv Kalama to Mamali Kalama. She'eini begeder Alman Klal, Seviv Kalama, nothing to do with the world. Dahainu she'ein sham bechinas Gili Alman Klal, there's no revelation whatsoever. And because there's no revelation, there's no divisions. Actually, Kol bechinas Alman, whatever it is that's going to be a world, in as much as Seviv Kalaman is concerned, Heim Sham Behiskalalus, Behelim, it's included there in a hidden state, Kumei al derech moshel atzmas hanefesh hanal, like the neshama, what's in its state of essence, and it's not beginning to reveal itself in the body. So the life of the creation begins in an essence state, which in the neshama is called etzem haneshama, and in terms of ishtalshus, it's called Seviv Kalaman. I'm going to go back to this soon. I'm on line 63. V'ein pirit Seviv makamal Seviv doesn't mean that it's around, that it's spatially distant, because Seviv is the same place as Mamali, right here. Shariksiv, the pasuk says, Hashem says, I fill heaven and earth. Emphasis on the word ani, and I goes on Seviv Kalaman. As I've told you many times in the past, there's 2 psukim. One pasuk says, Es Hashemayim v'esaretz ani moli, and the other pasuk says, Mole kalaretz kvoidei. So when you examine these 2 psukim, 2 things come out at you. The first is that in the first pasuk it says heaven and earth. In the second pasuk it says only earth. And in the first pasuk Hashem is called Ani, and the second pasuk Hashem is called Kavod. So it's explained in Chassidus that Ani goes on Seviv Kalaman, which is the same in all of the worlds. Heaven and earth are equal. And the word Kavod goes on Mamali Kalaman, which is distinct to each world separately, which is why it only says Oretz. So Ani means Seviv Kalaman. And the pasuk says, "Es l'shmayim v'esaretz ani malei," that Seviv Kalaman is filling the world, not just surrounding it. Ani mamish, I mamish. Seviv mamish is filling the world. Ella, the meaning of the word makif, being surrounded, she'ein sham bechinas gilui. Seviv Kalaman says in Tanya Perek Mem Ches, does not mean around; it means not revealed. L'chshiyuchlu ha'elam mislekabel, the world should be able to receive it. V'leibatel b'metzias, not be nullified in their form, because they can't get Seviv Kalaman. Shaharei, why can't the worlds not experience a Gila Seviv Kalaman but being destroyed? Kol leilam is symbolic. Well, the worlds are limited, like the Gemara says, takshana. Each world has a measurable size. V'afil hamalachim shem sichlim nivdalim, even angels that are basically metaphysical beings. They're intellectuals that are removed from a body. Still, areyesh gvul asakos, up to the limit of what they can comprehend. And as a consequence, they cannot get the infinity of godliness as it is. It's infinite. So Seviv Kalaman is infinite. And anything which is infinite cannot be invested in a revealed way, in a finite creation, a finite world, without destroying it. So the Chayis of this world is called Mamale. The Chayis of this world is called revealed. Where does the revealed Chayis come from? It comes from the hidden Chayis, which is called Seviv. So let's go back to the mashal of the neshama again and repeat it. When you use the mashal of the neshama, there's basically 3 conditions as relates to what we are learning. The first condition is called etzam haneshama. Etzam haneshama means that the neshama existing in relationship with itself has no relationships to anything outside of itself, certainly not to a world, certainly not to a body. The second condition is the neshama comes into the guf. When the neshama comes into the guf, the etzem of the neshama becomes uplifted, removed, nistalik, helem. And there's reishas agilut, there's the beginning of the revealing of the neshama. The beginning of the revealing of the neshama is in the head, and included in what's revealed in the head is everything that's later going to be broken down into each one of the organs of limbs and limbs subsequently. After the life or light reveals itself in the head in general, then it radiates to the heart and to the lungs and to the eyes and to the ears and to the arms and to the legs. Each part of the body gets a different life based on its mezek and a tune, like the Rebbe said before. So there's the way life exists and has no relationship with another, called etzem. There's the way life exists on a level which is called gili kloli, which is the way the life is in the brain. And then there's the life, gili prati, where it radiates into the whole body. And the nimshal is this. Life, in terms of creation, is in Sevav Kalam. But in as much as life is in Sevav Kalam, the world doesn't know it. You can't know infinity. If you know infinity, you can't know yourself. You disappear. It'll destroy you. The beginning of the emergence of life from Sevav Kalam is called the Rosh, the head. The beginning of the revelation. And that Rosh is Rosh Hashanah. And it's not because the creation is being renewed. It's because the purpose of creation is being renewed. And this has to do with Adam Rishon, which is why it's Rosh Hashanah, not Chafei B'Yellow. And from Rosh Hashanah it radiates to the whole year. And the Rebbe continues. I'm on line 68. Val Yedei his chachas gili kazeh. By the renewal of this revelation, Shulamayla min ha'ishtalshus, which is in and of itself above the world, above the chain reaction of the world. Lebechinas v'seider ha'ishtalshus, that it should descend into the parameters, into the criteria and the order of the creation. The Hainu, this means that mi bechinas ani moleh, from the level of ani, which means Sevav Kalamin, which is how Hashem fills the world, or the world knowing it. Ani mamish. Lebechinas moleh kol ha'aretz kevedei, that a certain measure of life should emerge from the unknown ani to the knowable kavod. Hu bechinas hislapshus bebechinas mamala kalam. It's the way godliness, the way life is coming forward from the unknowable or unknown infinity to the finite knowable life which is revealed. And the Rebbe continues, Nimshach tchila reishes agiloi. The beginning of this is the initial revelation, which is Beklos Achayis, for life in general, for a unit of time called a year, which is Bereish Hashanah. And this, of course, continues Al Kol Hashanah for the duration of the year, and then as it breaks down to smaller and smaller units, V'achach leprakim, V'chadoshim, V'yamim, V'regoyim, B'derech Eshtashos, like the Rebbe said before. But we're not celebrating what happened. We're celebrating what's happening. And what's happening is not happening on the day the Eibishter made the world. What's happening is happening on the day the Eibishter created what is the purpose of his world, the creation of Adam and Chava. So this is the answer to the question. Tikku b'chayde sheifa. We're blowing sheifa when the world is renewed. What is the meaning of renewed? That there's a new oil from Sevav Kalaman, which is here, but hidden, emerging in a way of Gilui, which is the beginning of the transference from Sevav Kalaman to Mamala Kalaman, to bring a new life into the world for the duration of a year. And the Rebbe continues and he says on line 73, this can be called in the language of Kabbalah the fusion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shechina. Right, there's Kedusha and then there's Shechina. Shechina is the lower level, Kedusha is the higher level. And in this particular context, Shechina would be the life that the world knows. Kedusha means the life that the world cannot know because it's infinite. Yichud Kutcha B'nei Choshen means where there's a new meaning between the unknowable life and the knowable life to renew life. Pirish Kutcha B'nei, the meaning of the word Kadosh or holy is B'chinas Kadosh or moved, which is removed. Kinyan Haglas Harvikidash, that there's a relation between the word offense or a limitation or a separation and the word Kedusha, the Hainu B'chinas Sevav Kalam, which is level of godliness, which is called Sevav, which means hidden, unknowable, Etzem. And of course, Shechin, Te'ubechinas Mamala Kalam, and Shechina goes on the godliness which is manifest and revealed. Vayichud he, and the union is that there should be a new Gili from Sevav and Mamali. Ham Shacham Bechinas Sevav Kalam Bechinas Ani Mali. That from the level of godliness which is called Helim, or Etzem, that finds itself in the very space of creation itself in an unknowable way, it should bring forward a renewal of revealed life. Lebechinas Mamala Kalaman. Yesterday, the day before Rosh Hashanah, there was life in this world. And today, you're not continuing that same life. You're drawing forward a new life from the level of Seviv Kalaman to renew the world. And the Rebbe concludes, this happened in Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because we're not talking about a physiological process. We're not talking about a biological process. We're talking about a spiritual process, a purpose-oriented process. And that purpose-oriented process happens when the one who was destined to fulfill the purpose is created, namely Adam, which is why Rosh Hashanah is a far more important date than Chafei B'Iyar.